Jonathan Haidt is the professor of ethical leadership at New York University's Stern School of Business. He is the author of the bestsellers The Righteous Mind, The Coddling of the American Mind, and The Happiness Hypothesis. Jonathan has been inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, been selected as one of the top 50 thinkers in the world, and given 4 TED Talks. We were introduced by our guest in Chapter 68, Mr. Roger Martin. Jonathan and I sit down and talk about his brand new cover story 8,000-word article in The Atlantic called After Babel, How Social Media Dissolved the Mortar of Society and Made America Stupid, together with his 3 most formative books, in his kitchen over delicious Korean food. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Okay. Hi, John.
Hello, Neil.
Thank you for inviting me into your kitchen.
During COVID, there's not a lot of other places where we can sit and talk quietly.
Well, I appreciate it. And for serving me some of your wife's delicious Korean food, which is, I'm looking at a bowl right now. It's got rice, beef?
Yes, beef short rib.
And what's the gravy? What's the brown?
Some magical concoction. I don't know.
You just opened your fridge and there was Korean food in it. Does that happen a lot around here?
Well, when you're married to a Korean American woman, yes.
Oh, beautiful. How did you meet?
We met through a mutual friend in Charlottesville when I was teaching at UVA, and she had been a graduate student at UVA.
Oh, nice. And a photographer now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, I appreciate it. We're sitting in a room that's got a bowl of avocados on it, some Korean seasoned seaweed in the plastic bags. I've got my books beside me. You've got your books beside me. We've got some light coming in, even though it was raining earlier. Now it looks like it's briefly stopped. And I'm really thrilled and excited to chat with you about your formative books.
Well, thank you, Neil. It's a pleasure to go back in time. This is, 30 years ago, and remember this. I haven't thought about these books in a little while, but they're the books that really changed me.
What was your practice? Because this is something that listeners sometimes ask me. What was your practice for figuring out what was most formative to you? Did you go to your bookshelf and look at them, or was it did they come quickly and naturally to you?
Yeah. Well, I think you had encouraged me to look back to childhood or teen years or very early, and nothing really stood out. And in the intellectual history of my life, there's 1993 that was like the born again year. That was when everything really changed for reasons that we'll get into. And so I was thinking about books related to that period when it was right after graduate school. I was a postdoc at the University of Chicago, and it was a combination of experiences, travel, and books that I was reading that really changed me into a very different person.
Okay, so you had a time in your life that you knew about, and so you revisited what you read at that time.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Just before we jump into the books, also just I come to New York. I'm here in New York. The rumor during COVID was cities are dead. I come here. I'm walking through Bryant Park last night. There's a movie showing, and there's got to be 5,000 people on the grass watching a film together. It just made me realize cities aren't dead. Did you have being in Manhattan? I'm assuming the whole pandemic.
The whole time, yeah.
You were always here. You didn't. So what's your view on cities right now? Are we coming through it? Or is the school? Is NYU all opening back up and everything?
Yeah, NYU really did a great job. It was just a heroic, incredibly difficult job to keep things open, to keep things safe. Some classes were in person last year. I taught one. It was very, very difficult because everyone was separated and half the class was coming in by Zoom anyway, so it was really tough. But NYU's done an amazing job of keeping things going. Everything's in person now. The
in-person classroom still holds a place in society. It's an important thing. You can't equate that to Zoom, Skype type sessions.
No, that's right. 10 or 15 years ago, when MOOCs became popular, everyone said,
massive online courses.
Massive online, that's right. And people said, universities are going to die. They have this overpriced product. It's incredibly expensive to go to college, and you can learn just as much online, maybe even better because it's customized to your speed. Yeah. But it turns out people really want to be together. And then the technology improved greatly. And what we have now with Zoom, and we're all forced to discover, it actually works pretty well. But even still, young people in particular really want to be together. Older people who have families and kids at home, a lot of them are saying, you know what, I'd be happy to stay on Zoom forever. But very few young people are saying that. And there is something magical about being in person. This goes back to, Plato's Academy. You sit around in a circle. Now, back then you drink or take drugs and talk about ideas, but there's something about being together and talking about ideas that can't really be fully replicated on Zoom. Even though Zoom, we've discovered, has a lot of great uses. We're thrilled to have it, but it turns out reports of the in-person university class dying were premature.
Right. And you said something about, but you've done a lot of research on the something about too, the human, the hive.
That's right.
Can you articulate the something about being in person
sure.
more for us?
Yeah. So I think
I'm going to constantly do that to you because I know how much you have behind this stuff. I want to just explore it a little bit.
No, I mean, the more we can stitch things together across time in our conversation, the richer it'll feel to listen to. So, part of, I think, the narrative of our talk today is that I used to be a standard rationalist, and I became an intuitionist and an emergentist, and my thinking changed a lot from reading the books that we're going to talk about today. And just to jump ahead a bit, one of the biggest ideas I've been working with is that we're hive creatures like bees. We have a different evolutionary history, but human beings went through a period of group-level selection.
Right.
It may not have been that long, but it left a mark on us, and that's why we're now religious. We wouldn't be religious without group-level selection, and that's a big debate that I've had with people like Richard Dawkins and others who don't think that group selection ever happened. But I think the signs of it are all around us, and the fact that there's a whole suite of emotions that you can only get in a group, especially if you're doing things together synchronously in time. And so learning together, laughing together, it turns out, Zoom it's like a low cost, it costs a lot less, it's a lot easier, but you don't get quite the thrill.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. And this is partly why I like to fly to my guests and sit at their kitchen table.
That's right. It wouldn't be the same.
Have podcasts like this. And I appreciate you being up for that because we could have just done this from Toronto,
Zoom,
but I appreciate doing that. So thank you. I do agree. It brings something else. And one of the things it brings is that we get to pile the books up in between us like we have right now beside the pink salt of the wooden spoon and the delicious Korean food. And I get to say to you, let me tell listeners and let me overview listeners your first most formative book, which is On Suicide by Emile Durkheim. That's Durkheim. This book was originally published in France in 1897 by Felix Alcan. The English edition didn't come out until 1952 by Routledge and Keegan Paul. Cover is blue, white, and black. Top two-thirds are dominated by this kind of like Picasso-type white figure against a blue backdrop with a dark shadow on the left and a red mark on the neck. Bottom third is black, just has the author's name in red and the title On Suicide in white. Emile Durkheim was born in 1850 in Epinal, France, and died in 1917 in Paris, France. I guess eventually circled the metropolis. French sociologist and intellectual, considered to be the founder of modern social science. On Suicide was the first methodological study of a social fact in the context of society. It is a case study of suicide, a publication unique for its time that provided an example of what the sociological monograph, which I don't know what that means, sociological monograph should look like. File this one, Dewey Decimal Heads under 362.228 for mental illness. John, please tell us about your relationship with On Suicide by Emile Durkheim.
That was a very good summary from the summary of the book. I went to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania. I originally went to study cognitive psychology. I was a philosophy major undergrad. I worked for the U.S. government writing computer programs. Nothing cool. It was just low-level Bureau of Labor Statistics interfaces for people calculating the consumer price index. But I knew some computer science. I'd taken classes in it, and I thought I wanted to go to graduate school in artificial intelligence. That was all the rage back in 1986, 1987.
Artificial intelligence was all the rage in 1986.
Yeah, there were three waves of AI. One in the late 60s and one in the mid 80s, and neither of them really took off because they couldn't really produce the product. And then another one happened again beginning in the 90s, and that's where we are now because that one is really working. But anyway, so I applied to graduate schools in cognitive science, and I was accepted only at one, the University of Pennsylvania. And soon after I got there, I was going to work with a particular professor on the psychology of humor, and I was going to do the cognitive psychology of humor and puns and punning. I'm one of these rationalist, logical types who enjoys bad jokes and punning. And I wrote up a
side question. You said in your acknowledgments of The Righteous Mind, thank you for my editor for saving me from too many puns.
Oh.
You said that in the acknowledgments.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah,
I guess maybe I still continue to do it.
But you think puns are bad.
No, but the person who makes them enjoys them, but everyone else groans.
Oh, yeah. Why is that? We'll have to talk about that later.
That's a separate issue.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
Freud would say it's because there's no sex or aggression, just a little bit of cleverness, and you enjoy your own cleverness, others don't.
Okay. So you thought you were going to study the psychology of humor.
Yeah. But I didn't really connect with my graduate advisor, and instead I actually connected with a couple of other people. One, Jonathan Barron, was studying thinking and decision making, and he had a side interest in moral thinking, and I had written my honors thesis as an undergrad on free will and decision making. So I started studying moral psychology my first year at Penn, 1987, but it was actually pretty dull and dry and boring.
And for listeners who don't know the phrase moral psychology, the quick summary of what moral psychology is would be...
it's just the psychology of how it is that we make judgments of each other, part we'll get to later is we make judgments of each other in part because we co-create a vast imagined world that we then live in, and within that world, it's constant judgments of each other. So, and that's right where we are, because that's the view that I got from reading Emile Durkheim's Suicide. So in my third year of graduate school, I should just say, in my first year, I switched over from studying humor to studying morality. But at the time, that meant moral decision-making. The main figure was Lawrence Kohlberg, a really brilliant, multidisciplinary figure. But he studied how children develop the ability to reason about moral violations. It was all very dry, based on cognitive developmental work of Jean Piaget and others. So it's interesting, but it was kind of dry. And then my sophomore year, my second year of graduate school, I took a course from an amazing anthropologist named Alan Fisk, who taught me cultural psychology, and that just blew my mind open, reading ethnographies. So I easily could have included some ethnographies here, some books about other cultures. But that really opened my mind beyond individual psychology to more group level things.
Right.
And so then my third year, I think it was my third year of graduate school.
It's long graduate school.
Well, grad school is typically in psychology about 5 or 6 years.
Okay, so you're only in 3 then.
Yeah,
Right.
so you take courses for the first 2 or 3 years. No, but we're done with the coursework because it was either my second or third year. I then took my first ever sociology course. I'd never taken one in college. And it was with a sociologist named Marvin Wolfgang, who studied crime. And it was a course on, I don't know why I took a course on the sociology of crime, but the first text we read was the most important book in the field, Emile Durkheim's book, Suicide, in which Durkheim analyzes suicide not as a thing that a person does, like you must have felt hopeless. Like, no, he doesn't even care about that. He just looks at suicide as a sociological fact. And he develops this idea. So this is like the 1890s, really the very early days of sociology, developing the idea that sociology is a field unto itself. It studies social facts. You can't touch them. They're not single things, but yet the suicide rate is a thing, and it goes up and down in relation to things that you can study. And this was totally new to me, this way of thinking about emergent facts, things that only are real once we all start interacting. And the best way I can communicate this to listeners is those who've seen the movie The Matrix, or any of the the Matrix movies, where in the book Neuromancer, William Gibson in the 1980s, the origin of all of this, he describes the Matrix as a consensual hallucination. And that's the crucial idea. And that's what blew me away in grad school, the idea that psychology is actually pretty easy because we're all individuals and we're studying individual thinking. So I love psychology. I'm thrilled to be a social psychologist, but it's actually not that hard. Sociology is harder because you're studying emergent facts that our brains didn't evolve to think about. And so Durkheim was one of the first to study the suicide rate as a thing you can study. And he doesn't care whether you're depressed or not. He wants to know, why does the suicide rate go up? Oh, well, what do you think happens during wartime? How terrible war is. Boy, people must kill themselves more. No, they kill themselves less.
Right.
A universal dictum, when war comes, suicide plummets because people are bound together.
Right.
There are different kinds of suicide, but in this book, Suicide, Durkheim goes through how you can commit suicide either because you're too tightly bound, and in honor cultures, people often kill themselves because they're ashamed, or because you're too loosely bound. And in modern Western, especially Protestant societies, we have what Durkheim called anomie, or normlessness. We are too loosely bound in. And when people are not, what he showed in this amazing book is that the more you're tightly bound in and restrained, the lower the suicide rate. So Jews in Europe at the time, Jews had the lowest suicide rate. They were still in very religious communities. Then Catholics, and the Protestants, who had all this freedom, they were the ones who killed themselves the most. And if you're single, highest suicide rate. If you're married, it goes down. If you're married with kids, it goes down more. So anyway, this kind of analysis, that the more you're bound in, the less you kill yourself. This was a complete revelation to me.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a quote I have pulled out. He points out that suicide has become an increasing problem as societies become increasingly more civilized, as people become more educated, as people increasingly feel like they are themselves individuals that are personally responsible for their position in life. Suicide increases.
That's right. That's right. So, so men killed themselves more than women, Protestants more than others. This was back then.
He even did things on weather and times of the year, I believe.
Oh, I don't remember that, but it would make sense.
Like in the winter versus the summer, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, but the key thing is that we need to be bound in. And so this was one of those delicious paradoxes that you get from great philosophical or scientific or social scientific literature, that we crave freedom, we want freedom, but it's actually in many ways not good for us. We want things that often backfire. And so the secret to a good society is one that binds people in, not too tightly, but also not too loosely. And America has always erred on the side of too loose. Now, I shouldn't say always. I should say for much of the 20th century, and then until fairly recently, I think the constraints were generally fairly loose.
But they say suicide rates are increasing now.
In the U.S., but around the world they're dropping. Around the world they've been dropping. The mystery is, why are they going up in the U.S.?
And what's the answer to the mystery?
I think we have a lot more anomie than other places. This is what Durkheim was talking about, normlessness. If we get into the book I'm now just starting on Life After Babel, I think the social bounds and binds on us have just come apart entirely. We're now in the world after Babel, which is a frightening, lonely place where we are not bound into healthy or stable groups.
When you say healthy, stable groups, you mean like tribes, communities, the famous Dunbar number of 150
sports teams,
people in a
religious
community.
Congregations, Elks Club, all the sorts of social clubs that Americans made in the 20th century as formal religion was weakening. We had civic organizations to take their place.
Girl Guides, Rotary Clubs.
And those are all gone now. That's right. Yeah.
Does the solution not appear to be putting those things back together again then? Or?
You can't. We'll talk about that later maybe, because you can't just put the genie back in the bottle. You can't just say, hey, people, you have all this freedom now.
Yeah.
In some ways it's bad for you. Why don't you just commit yourself to things? And that's one of the great conservative insights. I mean, I'm neither liberal nor conservative. I used to be always on the left, and now I'm nothing. But one of the great conservative insights is that we do need to be bound in by social institutions, and then we need to hide the fact that they're doing this work. It's very much like the Wizard of Oz, when the wizard is behind a curtain, but so the reality is, like, you don't want to know the reality, but you've got this big, terrifying God there, and that's powerful. And once you see it's actually just a little man at these controls, it loses its power. But I think that now, as society is changing so fast, it's changing at a speed beyond our capacity. And this, I think, is leading to a sense of it that everything is coming apart, shredded, not the center cannot hold.
Okay. I'm holding this beautiful view of, the tethering of society, the loosening of society. And there's a quote from the book I wanted to get your opinion on here.
Okay.
Around purpose. One does not advance when one walks toward no goal, or, which is the same thing, when his goal is infinity. This is a quote from the book on suicide. You've spoken a lot about being part of a group bigger than yourself. You've talked a lot about this. It's in Righteous Minds and a lot of your TED Talks. And it's that other part of the quote, that the goal of infinity, that made me pause. Because right now we live in a world where we're all online. We all have endless feeds. We are connected to infinite communities and infinite places. Yeah. It seems like the highest you can ever achieve now is something satisfying your expectations, never exceeding your expectations. So you've talked a lot about how prevalent our online relationships are. I think I've read in your book proposal for the new book, it turns out that connecting everybody to everybody is a bad idea.
Right.
I've heard you say that.
Yeah, it's a terrible idea.
But that's not commonly held. People don't. Why is that a terrible idea?
Yeah.
So you're saying the internet is a bad idea?
Oh, basically. No. The internet on the whole is incredible. So I love the internet, and I love my iPhone. The technology is incredible.
Yeah.
It's not that that we can reach others. That's not a bad thing. I mean, long distance phone service is great. Free long distance phone service is even better. It's connecting everyone to everyone in ways that don't encourage information sharing and true communication, but they encourage social posturing and display.
Right.
And so connecting everybody to everybody in ways where everybody else is chiming in. And on many social media platforms, your goal as you're talking to someone is not to truly communicate. If that was your goal, you should call them on the phone or Skype or Zoom for free and talk. But what you're trying to do is communicate in a way, not communicate. What you're trying to do is display things that will appeal to the audience.
Right, or the algorithm.
Well, you're trying to appeal to an audience, and the algorithm is gaming you to keep you on because you're wasting your life and for many people, your mental health. It's generally bad for you to be doing this, but you're the product. The companies want to keep you hooked so that they can sell your attention to the companies that are paying them for it. Let's see.
Well, we're so primed for social grooming that when I get retweets on a quote, I'm likely to see what did I say that was provocative or controversial so I can do it again? Or what did I post? If I post a quote on Instagram, it doesn't go anywhere. But if I post a picture of my baby's toes, it goes viral. So now I'm encouraged to share more of my life. And if I say a controversial opinion, it goes viral. So now I'm encouraged to be more controversial. So there is an algorithm behind what people see. You're saying that's the tail wagging the dog. That's controlling our behavior, and now we're communicating in unhealthy ways that are around attention and likes and posturing, as opposed to having a sitting at the kitchen table dialogue.
Right. Exactly, that's right. So if you develop a view of human life as, and this is what I developed in my first book, the happiness hypothesis, is that we're hive creatures like bees in some ways. We evolved to live in hives. We're ultra-social creatures. We're the only ultra-social mammal other than naked mole rats. But all the other,
just naked mole rats.
Yeah, just naked mole. Because if you think about it, because every other species that's ultra-social, they do it by having a queen who lays all the eggs. So ants, termites, various ultra-social spiders. There's all sorts of ultra-social bees. That's right. They all have a single female who lays thousands and thousands of eggs. Now that's not possible for a mammal. But there is one species of rodent like the naked mole rat that found a way to suppress breeding in everyone except for the queen. She has lots of little, it makes sense it's a rodent because they can have lots of babies. But other than that, we're the only ultra-social ones. And we're the only ultra-social creatures on Earth that do it without kinship. So we can cooperate in vast groups that are not siblings.
Right. And when you say kinship, you mean people that aren't related to each other.
That's right. When you see ultra-sociality anywhere else, they're siblings. Now, a wolf pack, so like a wolf pack is a small, that's not exactly ultra-social, that's just social. But if you get up to hundreds or thousands, they're all siblings unless they're humans. And we're really good at doing it.
Look at a Packers game.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So sports makes absolutely no sense. And as a kid, I didn't get it. It wasn't until actually I got a PhD in social psychology that I understood why most guys are into sports. I didn't have the gene or something. But once I read Durkheim, and once I understood sociology, and once I understood emergent social facts, and once I had read a lot of evolution, and I learned about multi-level selection, and learned about bees and wasps and ants and termites, I realized, whoa, we are like bees, ants, wasps, and termites, except we do it through sacredness. We do it by making something sacred and then circling around it. So at a sports game, and I write about this in The Righteous Mind, going to football games at the University of Virginia, where I taught for 16 years. It's a school with great school spirit. And if you look at a college football game at a school that's really gung-ho for football, it doesn't make any sense unless you've read Durkheim or unless you've read sociology. And you can see that this is actually the hiving ritual. This is the things that we do to create something which is larger than the sum of the thousands and thousands of students and alumni who are taking part in it.
And that's at threat today.
Well, it's being hacked and hijacked, and it's being applied in unhealthy ways. So a healthy society, there's a wonderful book called, by David Berraby, it's called Something About Us or Us and Them. And he talks about a healthy society is one that has all kinds of cross-cutting hives. So you have sports teams, you have, after school, you have churches, groups, you have, you're bonded with your company.
Neighborhood, maybe.
Yeah. So if they're cross-cutting, that's very healthy. What's really unhealthy is if everything becomes a single division. And so in some neighborhoods, if you've got the Bloods versus the Crips and that dominates everything, you get real violence. America has become a place where, up until the 70s or 80s, people cared a lot more about the religion that their child married into than the political party. They didn't care about the political party very much. But now it's exactly the reverse. People don't care very much about the religion or even the race anymore of who their child marries, but they really don't want their kids to marry someone from the other party. This is really unhealthy when everything becomes a single division point of us versus them, and a single division point of us versus them, and it all lines up. That's when you have the making of something like civil war. I don't want to over dramatize and say we're all going to take up arms against each other, but we do have a dysfunctional society in which everything is becoming the red team versus the blue team. Even restaurants, even what used to be private or commercial life, now is increasingly, as our society gets sicker and sicker, is increasingly pulled into this binary divide. And to the extent that social media exacerbates it, it's a huge problem.
And when you look at, you said 70s, 80s to today, you do point out, it sounds like the specific steps to get to where we are now in terms of dysfunction include the 2009, 2010 smartphone, the 2010, 2011 social media, the like button, the retweet button. I've heard you talk a lot about this. The fact that we're online more, that probably, I'm assuming COVID has accelerated that.
Yeah.
And now we're in this divisive place as a result.
Yeah. The short version of it would be to say that there used to be all kinds of cross-cutting identities. And that's what, and if you're going to only have two political parties, what they used to be is, it was like the northern industrialists had common cause with the western ranchers, or what, I don't even know what it was, but it was, multiple stuff like that. It was about interests. Interests are fine because those are not sacred. You don't get violent, actually, over your interests as much as you do over your religious values. And increasingly, it's become the red versus blue divide over values, not even over material interests. And so that, having the Cold War was great for us because we had something to unite against. We had a lot of force binding us together. We had a media environment in the late 20th century that was binding us together. There were 3 networks. We all got our news from the same source. I just heard recently somebody talking about how on the moon landing, the assassinations, there were a couple of events in the 60s and 70s that, like, everybody in the country and everybody in the world to some extent had the same information at the same time, and that will never happen again.
Right.
So there were a variety of things that pulled for a healthier political climate long ago. In many ways, things are better now. This is not doom and gloom. Obviously, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, animal rights, on all those fronts, we've made extraordinary progress. But my alarm, and it comes in part from having studied sociology and Durkheim and understanding the way that moral orders emerge, is that now we have a shredded moral fabric. We live in thousands or millions of little temporary bubbles.
Almost infinite numbers.
Infinitely
like
divisible.
8 billion echo chambers.
Yeah, that's right. We have an unlimited number of echo chambers and bubbles, and they're shape-shifting constantly. But at the national level, a lot of stuff does get sucked into the one red-blue divide. So I am concerned that our sociology is evolving so quickly, and our evolutionary history and our evolved minds can't keep up with it.
Yeah. Because one thing I've heard you start to speak about a little bit is the lack of a consistent reality. Mm-hmm. I know there's a red-blue divide at the top level, but also I want to focus on that 8 billion echo chambers thing. If everybody's getting their news from their own stream, their own feed, which is programmed to maximize engagement, which is from a profit-seeking company, the number one newspaper in the world is the Facebook news feed. Yeah. It's not the New York Times. It's not the Washington Post. It's the newspaper that a billion people are reading. But the thing is, all billion versions of the newspaper are totally different. Yeah. So then you lose a sense of shared reality, and that seems quite scary to me.
That's right, and that's the whole point of my next book, Life After Babel.
Okay.
Because the Babel metaphor, it's this short little story. It's just like 8 or 10 lines long in the Bible.
And for those of us that don't know the Babel story, could you just say it for us quickly?
So soon after after the flood, Noah and the flood, people are they're recovering and they're spreading out, and they have all one language. All the people speak one language. And the people on the plain of Shinar, somewhere in Mesopotamia, I think, decide that they're going to build a tower up to heaven. They're going to build a city with a tower reaching to heaven. And God sees it and sees the arrogance of these people, thinking that they can behave like gods. And he says, "Let us go down and confound their language so that they may not understand one another." And so he goes down. He doesn't actually physically destroy the tower, as people think in the common imagination, but essentially he does. It's as though he knocks over the tower. And the people are scattered upon the face of the earth, and they cannot understand each other. And that's why the place is called Babel, because in one of whatever language the Bible was written in, that story was written in, it's, I don't know if it sounded like ba, 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 like they couldn't understand each other. It was just nonsense syllables. And my argument in this book that I'm working on now is that, let's suppose the Tower of Babel story takes place, in 1000 BC or 1500 BC. We've now had 3,000 years of basically rebuilding the tower, and we did a great job of it. And we built roads, and then radio and television and mail services and email, and boy did we connect people to the point where we even have Google Translate. So God curses us by saying we will never understand each other. But, take that, God. We invented, Google Translate. We can actually speak to each other across languages. And this the people begin to do. And the high watermark of that, I think, was about 2011, when it seemed as though the Arab Spring was the demonstration that no dictator can stand up to Facebook.
Right.
No dictator can stand up to the people united by technology.
Yes. You're talking about the Mubarak, all the Facebook groups coalescing to cause the Arab Spring.
That's
people
right.
in a lot of countries
Exactly.
protesting the leaders. Yeah,
that's right. It began in Tunisia, but then especially Wael Ghonim created this Facebook group in Egypt, and then it spread elsewhere. And we were all so optimistic in early 2011, but that didn't work out so well. And it turns out that Facebook in particular was changing its business model that very year. 2011, 2012, 2013, they developed the business model that they now have, which is that consumers, the customers, what seems like the customers are actually the product, and what they sell is our eyeballs and our attention to the advertisers. So, my analysis, along with Tobias Rose Stockwell, we wrote about this in The Atlantic, is that something really changed between 2009, when the like button was added and the retweet button was added and things got much more contagious, and 2015, when things went to hell in the universities and we saw this bizarre eruption of safetyism and moralistic anger and misunderstanding and demands for
cancel culture.
Cancel culture, that's right. So something really changed in that era, 2009 to 2015, and I think now we are in the post-Babel age. The tower has fallen. We will never again understand each other. What we've seen with COVID and our inability to have consensus that vaccines work.
Masks.
That's right. So just, get used to it, because it's going to get worse.
Okay.
Back to the books.
No. We're in the books, and we let the books take us where they take us. But on 269, and adding to this fragmenting thing that you're talking about, page 269, Durkheim writes, "No living person can be happy or even live at all unless his needs are sufficiently well adjusted to his means. In other words, if he demands more than than can be provided for him, or even something other than can be provided, he will be constantly irritated and unable to function without suffering." Mm-hmm. And I thought, this reminded me of, you did a TED Salon, I guess not a TED Talk, but a TED Salon in 2012, where you have this quote. Since 1979, almost all the gains in wealth have gone to the top 20%, especially to the top 1%. And you also said, rising inequality destroys our ability to trust each other, to feel like we're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
And you said one of the biggest causes is rising non-marital births. Mm-hmm. So now, layer onto that bunch of problems you just articulated for us, which I like, and we're going to keep exploring that, this rising income inequality, all the income going to the rich getting phenomenally richer, everybody else kind of staying status quo, decreasing. And you're tying this to rising non-marital birth.
No, so the way that I was tying it was a little trick that I was doing.
Okay.
Which is, I was beginning to see, so I was always on the left from the time I was a teenager until the early 2010s.
By the way, one of the most Googled phrases about you is Jonathan Haidt left or right?
Oh,
I know it's
good.
on Google. It's like the second or third thing people are looking for.
I'm so glad to hear that. And the answer is that I've only voted Democrat in my life because the Republican Party has gone insane for reasons we can talk about. But I now consider myself a centrist liberal, and I'm concerned about illiberalism on both sides. And the illiberalism on the right has gone insane, and the left has gone insane. And working in universities, I never see the right. There is no right. I just see the left. So that's a little side note. But yes, the reason why I talked about...
I want your comment on income inequality more in general.
So the reason that I was talking about this, I began to realize once I stepped out of the matrix, as it were, the matrix is a consensual hallucination. Once I stepped out of the left-wing matrix and I began to read conservative writing, National Review and things like that, I realized, wow, the right is correct about a lot of things and the left has no clue. And the left is correct about a lot of things. And the right, while you can't be conservative and not have heard what the left thinks, but they don't buy it. You can be on the left and have no idea what the right thinks. But anyway, what I came to see is, you know what? The left at the time, this is 2012, the left is really focused on income inequality. And they're right. This is a terrible thing that's happening to our democracy. And the right is focused on, they've been focused since the 60s on the family and on the dissolution of the family. And they're right. I mean, the statistics for non-marital birth are horrible. The outcomes for kids if your parents aren't married are horrible. So I began to see, you know what? Each side is right.
I see.
And there's a wonderful quote from John Stuart Mill, who became my favorite philosopher. When I wrote The Righteous Mind, it was David Hume who talked about intuitionism. But afterwards, it was John Stuart Mill who has a quote, something like, each side is right in what they affirm, but wrong in what they deny. And if they could only take into account the key claims of the other side, there would be little necessary to make their version correct, something like that. And so I began to see that the left is absolutely correct about income inequality, but one of the reasons for rising income inequality, and especially the race gap, is the decline of marriage.
Right.
And so you have to actually, if you listen to both sides. Yeah. And it's not that they're, rigidly always equally wrong. I mean, there are an awful lot of areas where the right is just crazy, but there are also different areas where the left is crazy. And so, I used to just sort of, keep my head down and make it go, don't worry, I vote Democrat, and I do. But I'm now, and basically the right got crazy first. Fox News made the right crazy beginning in the 90s. And there's a lot written about that shift. But I think social media has done a bigger number, or at least as big a number, on the left. Anyway, that's it. Sorry, let's get back to the books.
No, because I was quoting that part about the book about no person can be happy or even live at all unless his needs are sufficiently well adjusted to his means. So I was interested in income inequality as it relates to this issue that's causing...
Yes, but I like to use that quote for actually a different issue. I just read something of yours. I was doing a little research on you, and I saw something about, you wrote something about how it's having a limit. It's like having that you're going to do 1,000 with something or other.
Finite.
Yeah, so having something to work towards, having a constraint is satisfying.
I believe that.
Because one of the important psychological principles is pleasure comes not from reaching your goal, it comes from making progress on the journey.
Yes.
And when you reach the goal, you have a relaxation, but it's the progress on the journey. And if you know that you're making progress because you're up to, then you have the pleasure and you have structure. But if you just have a bottomless feed, an endless passage of stuff, that is just enervating.
See, so we agree. So this podcast we're doing right now is my quest for 1,000 of the most formative books in the world.
So that structures.
Each podcast is 3 books. I have 333 chapters over about almost 15 years. But previously I did a blog called 1,000 Also Things. Similarly, there's a finite constraint. And I look at my cell phone, I go on Spotify, there's
endless.
An infinite amount of music. I go on Netflix, infinite amount of TV. Yeah. It's infinite. And that is just, I know it's cognitively exhausting. I know it's physically exhausting. And I believe it creates a dissolution of trust because now we don't know how to filter and sort. And that's a big problem for me. I believe that finite is more trusted than infinite. And that's why I'm a big proponent of like a curated bookstore over the endlessness of Amazon.
That's right.
But we're swinging away from that with the internet because, of course, endless scrolling is a big part of this.
Durkheim would agree. What I learned from Durkheim is that we need structure, constraint, and restraint within which we can have freedom.
Yes, we need structure, constraint, and restraint within which we can have freedom.
Yeah.
Okay,
right. Obviously not too much. I'm not a fan of authoritarianism, but the problem in America has not been too much authoritarianism. It's been too much anomie or normlessness, and that might be why we're one of the few countries that has a rising suicide rate.
I like that, though. And I think part of it's not, totalitarianism, but just people choosing to put themselves in more curated environments. Jump up, grab a glass of water. We like the background noises on the show. That's another thing that's good. These nice little, I was going to say purple, but they're like blue little glasses here on this nice marble tabletop. I think partly it's people choosing to choose. One example I always give is people, I think, would rather go to a chef's tasting menu than the Cheesecake Factory with the 16 pages of the menu. Because we just know, or In-N-Out Burger versus a McDonald's. Like, if you know intuitively that you feel a bit more relaxed when you go to a curated thing, keep choosing that, because then we will be telling the businesses and the companies and all the institutions in our lives that we want more of that. We want less is more. That's right. That's right. Let's move on to your second book, Patterns, Thinking, and Cognition, A Theory of Judgment. This was by Howard Margolis in the University of Chicago Press in 1987. The cover is a mix of red, white, and black divided into three. This middle vignette with a bunch of black and white splotches, which look like some sort of Rorschach kind of diagram. I don't know if it's supposed to be anything. Title in large white lettering at the top, and the author's name is in white at the bottom. Howard Margolis is Margolis, was born in 1932 in Boston. He died in 2009. He's an American social scientist, longtime faculty member at the University of Chicago in the School of Public Policy Studies. Summary of the book: what happens when we think? How do people make judgments? While different theories abound and are heatedly debated, most are based on an algorithmic model, a computer model of how the brain works. Howard Margolis builds a fascinating case for a theory that thinking is based on patterns, recognizing patterns, and that this process is intrinsically illogical. Margolis gives a Darwinian account of how pattern recognition evolved to reach human cognitive abilities. Dewey Decimal Hits can file this under 153 for cognition and memory. John, please tell us about your relationship with Patterns, Thinking, and Cognition, A Theory of Judgment by Howard Margolis.
So when, after graduate school at Penn, I got my PhD in social psychology, and I did a postdoctoral stint with 2 years at the University of Chicago with a brilliant cultural anthropologist named Richard Schwader. And Schwader asked me to read this book, Patterns, Thinking, and Cognition. It was by one of his colleagues at the University of Chicago, Howard Margolis. He was a professor there at the time. And I'd never heard of it, never heard of him. But it also, just in the same way Durkheim had, it blew my mind in getting me to see that our thinking is not mostly what we're aware of. Like, we think a lot about logic or reasoning or conscious verbal stuff, but really our brains, all brains on Earth, are pattern matchers. They're neural networks. They do pattern matching. And when you train an animal, you train it to recognize patterns and link up patterns of behavior to patterns of perception. And the core distinction that Margolis helped me make is between what he calls seeing that and reasoning why. So seeing that, here I have it right here, the definition. He says, recognizing a pattern, whether in one jump or after a sequence of jumps, versus reasoning why, by which we describe how we think we reached a judgment or how we think another person could reach that judgment. And it really got me to see that the brain is 500 million years old. It's a neural network. It evolved to do pattern matching, not language, not logic.
Why do you say 500 million?
That's when the first one-celled organisms don't have brains, but nervous systems, simple nervous systems, are somewhere.
Our brain is an evolution feature from far before Homo sapiens.
Oh yeah, we're talking
and far before hominids.
We're talking like the Cambrian period.
Yeah,
we're talking.
But that brain is the same brain evolving over time.
It evolves over time, and it gets. Chimpanzees are very, very smart without language. And now they can do a little bit of reasoning, but they don't have to give reasons because they don't have language. And this was the breakthrough for me. So I'd been studying moral reasoning in graduate school. That's what Lawrence Kohlberg studied, moral reasoning.
Yeah.
Why?
Logical computer.
It's
algorithmic.
It's not just that it's logical, it's that it's post hoc, it's after the fact. So, should a man steal a drug to save his wife's life when she's dying of cancer and he can't afford it? The famous Heinz dilemma. And you interview kids, and I did that in my dissertation, and they tell you why they think that he should steal the drug. But that doesn't mean that's really why they made the judgment. That's just the string of arguments they give you after the fact. And what Margolis helped me see is that we're animals, a lot like other animals. The most important thing is the seeing that. You look at a pattern, like an optical illusion, and you see something. You can't help but see it.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it flips, and now you can't help but see the inverse of it, like with the reversible cubes, the old women, young women drawing, all those.
Yeah, your righteous mind and pattern thinking cognition has the two lines with the arrows pointing out or the arrows pointing in. Our brains think one is longer than the other. When you take a ruler, they're the same length. People are familiar with these types of patterns.
That's right. So our perceptual system is very clearly about seeing that. We see something. But then we have this ability to do reasoning why. And if you look in on your consciousness, especially if you've just had a conflict with a friend or with your spouse, what you'll see is that you're preparing a court case. You're preparing all kinds of arguments. Well, if she said this, then why didn't she believe that? And why did she do this? So we're prepared to do reasoning why, because we need to persuade others. And when you do a moral judgment interview, you say, well, what do you think about this, Bernie Sanders' proposal or anything else? What do you think about it? People they almost immediately know what they think. And then they come up with reasons. It's just like if you say, here's a photograph of a woman. Do you think she's beautiful or not? People don't have to compute. Like, they instantly know. And then you can say why, and then they'll give you reasons. But the two are separate. And so this led me to, this is why David Hume was my favorite philosopher while I was writing The Righteous Mind, because David Hume famously said that reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions and can never pretend to any other office than to serve and obey them. And so that's what Margolis helped me see, the cognitive psychology of of David Hume. So that's why this book was so important.
It's a bit subconscious over conscious.
Yes, subconscious is fine. It's not like the deep Freudian unconscious, but it's the unconscious like every other animal brain. It's just automatic. So it's better to say automatic versus controlled. And that later turned into the metaphor that I used in the happiness hypothesis, which is that the mind is divided like a small rider on a large elephant.
Yeah.
And the small rider is our conscious reasoning, and the large elephant is everything else. It's all the intuitions. So in Margolis' terms, the elephant is the seeing that, and the reasoning why is what the rider does after the fact.
And so what are the implications of this insight for the average person listening who's walking through the world? We got jobs, we got kids, we got family, so we have instinctive reactions to things. We don't always know why, so we reason why with our brain after the fact. Yeah. What are the implications of this book on?
Yeah. So the implications are that we are all like a small, relatively helpless rider on the back of a very large, very smart elephant. And if you want to get someone to do something, don't lecture the rider. Don't say, well, you've got to do this because you said this, and why do you've got to think, how do I appeal to the elephant? Because the elephant is really where the action is. The rider is very small. The rider's only, a few 100,000 years old. We didn't have language a million years ago, most likely. So it's very new, and the brain didn't
prefrontal cortex.
It's also temporal, some also temporal,
okay.
But it's very new. Our language centers are clearly innate. We did evolve for language, but once we got language in the last million years, the brain didn't rewire itself to hand controls over to this new and untested facility. And this is why we're so bad at logic problems, but we're incredible at perceptual problems. We have really good intuitions about how things move, how things work.
And whether we should trust people or not trust people, or that's famous,
right,
would I have a beer with this guy to decide if he's president or not?
Well, that's right. So it can be hacked. And that would bring us back to social media later on, but let's not go there. But yes, this amazing book by Howard Margolis got me to see that the basic cognitive structure is pattern matching, which fits with the connectionist approach to psychology and neuroscience. And we think in patterns, and that's why stories are so powerful.
So stories, metaphors, these are ways to appeal to the elephant?
That's right. Data does not appeal to the elephant. You have to speak to the elephant first, and so telling a good story is an essential part of persuasion. Now, if all you do is speak to the elephant, then you're a demagogue. But if you're a skilled politician or a skilled parent or a skilled spouse, you don't just hit the person with reasons like, no, you're wrong and here's why. Well, that really doesn't work with human beings.
I noticed that with my kids.
You've noticed that? Yeah.
But I don't know how to do the elephant appeal as well as you're saying I should. So tell me, like, in the context of parenting, we both have young children. I think yours are a little older than mine. Mine are 7 and under. To take this thing, I know you do this so well in your TED Talk. You open with a metaphor. Elephant and rider is itself a metaphor to understand the idea.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, if we're talking about parenting as an example, or something like that.
Well, that's the power. So first think in stories. And so, okay, you just did this to your brother. Think about a time when he did that to you, or think about a time when someone else did this to you. How did you feel? So you're taking it slow. You're setting up a pattern. And then if they say, oh, when he did that to me, I hated it. And that's the same as me doing this to my little brother.
Yeah.
So that's the way that you do with, if we're P-cognition species, as Margolis says, P-cognition is pattern cognition.
Before understanding.
Work on the patterns. Yeah, get the pattern right first. And that's why a lot of my talks and articles open with a thought experiment or a video. That's why great persuaders like Bill Clinton, would open with a story. Whereas a lot of rationalists open with data or evidence, and it doesn't work.
Okay, right. I'm understanding. So this is interesting too, though, because I think we have something else in common, which is that your wife is a photographer, right? My wife is an elementary school teacher. They're dealing in the emotional world, and for whatever can be said about your work, I just with the nature of the books that you're putting out, you're in the logical world. You're using metaphor and stories, but you are appealing to people's rational thinking. I was curious to ask you, because I noticed this in my wife and I, if we get into an argument or disagreement, I tend towards going to the logical side. She tends towards going to the emotional side. And you're married to an artist, as I feel like I am too. How do we have better relationships and communication and conversation when my instinct is to go to logic?
So this is, if you read almost any marital therapy book, this is one of the most common sex differences. I mean, what I'm saying here, that we're all basically a rider and an elephant, is true at everybody. But women, when women talk with each other, they're less likely to hit each other with data or to be moved by data. Men are more likely to try to hit each other over the head with data. It doesn't mean they're going to change each other's minds, but that's what they try. And when a man hits a woman over the head with data, that tends not to work very well. And so, if you're rational, if you actually think that the means you employ should be proportionate and appropriate to the ends you want to achieve, then rationality would say you should be an intuitionist. And that's what I became as I wrote The Righteous Mind, is an intuitionist. And that is to say that our morals come not from reasoning, but from intuition. These intuitions are shaped in part by evolution, but evolution gave us a lot of intuitions. And each culture builds on a subset of them. And so a traditional society with an honor culture will build on sexual purity and revenge, a group versus group revenge. So cultures build on different abilities. When you have to understand the persuasive task ahead of you. And so appealing to, I don't want to quite say emotions per se, but appealing to patterns and intuitions first.
Yeah, this is what I feel like I tend to do this, but I'm doing it from a script nature. Like I'm like, okay, lean in for the hug, lean in for the connection first. Like I'm telling myself these things and then doing them.
Okay, and where's the part where you say what she's right about?
Yeah, and the phrase I try to use, and she taught me the phrase is, how human of you to feel this way. I use this type
That's patronizing. No, tell me about the part where you say, honey, you're actually right about this. I was wrong about such and such, and you were right to call me out for it.
Nice. So you go right to that.
Yeah, start with that. Yeah. That's Dale Carnegie. So read Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Yeah. He was a brilliant social psychologist, and he understood how to work with people.
Just go to the apology at the beginning.
No, it's not the apology. It's identify what it is that the person is right about and acknowledge it. And right away, what you're doing to the elephant is you're saying, I'm not coming at you with a spear. I'm actually coming at you with a peace offering. You know what? You're right about the thing you most care about. You're actually right. And, I'm sorry that I said that to you, or I was wrong to say that to you. Now, about this thing that I care about, are you more willing to, to look at it from my point?
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
And that's the power of reciprocity.
I like this. And it also reminds me of a bit of getting to yes, identifying the things we both want as separate things in what we presume we're arguing over the same thing, but splitting up.
Okay. It's probably, if that's a good book that has lasted for many decades, which I think it is, then probably it is tapped into this basic intuitive psychology. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. Part of the challenge I have with chatting with you about anything is that your mind goes so deep, so wide, so fast. I feel like I'm trying to catch up to it in a good way, but now I'm like, there's like 12 things open that I want to just keep fluttering down.
We should probably get to
Let's move to the last
book,
and then hopefully we can tie some of these things we've opened from the first two books together with Storming Heaven, LSD and the American Dream by Jay Stevens. It came out in 1987 by the Atlantic Monthly Press. Cover is a light purple with the title Storming Heaven in large black block letters in the center. The word LSD and the American Dream are in black, embedded in a red banner above. There's this image of like something that looks like it's from The Scream or something, a distorted face kind of screaming above the title. And the author's name is in top, Jay Stevens, in black. Jay Stevens was born in 1953 in Vermont. He is a poet, historian, journalist with a special interest in states of consciousness. He also co-authored Drumming at the Age of Magic with the Grateful Dead percussionist Mickey Hart. He is also the founder of Applied Orphics, a program bringing at-risk teenagers and professional musicians and poets together. In this brilliant, riveting, and exhaustively researched book, Jay relates this history of that curious molecule, LSD. He unearths the story of pinch and S complexity, tells it with novelistic flair, and irrefutably demonstrates LSD's pivotal role in the cultural upheavals that shook America in the 1960s and changed the country forever. File this one under 306.1 for subcultures. John, please tell us about your relationship with Storming Heaven, LSD and the American Dream by Jay Stevens.
Okay, so first I had my mind blown open by reading sociology in graduate school, and coming to see that there are sociological facts or social facts that don't really fit into our brains, but they're out there and you have to struggle to grasp them. That's what's really fun about sociology. And then I go to my postdoc at the University of Chicago, and I work with Richard Schwede, which also blows my mind open about culture and about cognition. And I read Howard Margolis' Patterns, Thinking, and Cognition, and now I'm realizing, oh my God, so it's really all about the intuitions. That drives everything. And then at the end of my first year of the postdoc, I go back to Philadelphia, where I get together with my ex-girlfriend. We're still friends, and our group of friends. And she had obtained LSD for the group of us. And I'd always been interested in it, but I'd never tried any psychedelics. And that night, it was June 12th, 1992. 1993. Many people remember when they feel born again, they often remember the day because they feel like they were one person before it and a different person after.
Interesting.
And so, June 12th, 1993 is when my new self began. And I was primed for it in so many ways. Primed for it by reading the things I'd been reading. I was preparing to go to India. I'd gotten a fellowship to go to Bhubaneswar, India, to do research on purity and pollution. So I'd been reading the Bhagavad Gita. I'd been reading Hinduism. I'd always been interested in Buddhism. So I kind of knew, I knew a lot of things about Hinduism and Buddhism. I knew them consciously, like my rider knew them. And then, about a 6-hour period, the elephant knew them. It was a metaphor that I use is it's like I lived in this fabulous mansion, this 100-room mansion my whole life, and there was so much to explore, and I loved living there. And one night, a fist punched through the ceiling, picked me up, took me around the world, showed me that 100-room mansion was tiny, it was nothing compared to the rest of the world. And then it put me back in, sealed up the roof, and said, "Okay, now continue about your business." So it was a classic enlightenment experience, very much like what happens to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna gives him a third eye and says, oh yeah, you want to see this universe? You asked to see the universe as it is? Here you go. And he's just sputtering. It's, infinite numbers of suns have I seen, and I can't remember the quotes, but it's basically the peak of an LSD trip. And so that one night changed the way I think permanently. It made me more open, more creative, much less of a rationalist, much less arrogant, much less sure of myself, and
much less angry. I think you said.
Yeah, I rarely get angry since then. Since that night, I very rarely get angry. I didn't have a moment of anger for the next several months, not a moment. And it really, I think, prepared me to be a social scientist because I no longer wanted to be on a team fighting another team. I wanted to understand. I wanted to look at things this is so amazing.
Yeah.
All these humans running around with credit cards and, pyramid shopping schemes and, outward bound. All these things we do, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So
you were able to be more of an observer of things rather than in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I was very angry about politics from the time, certainly from the time Ronald Reagan was elected, until I had this LSD experience. Yeah.
So you did LSD, then you read the book after.
Yes. So then, here I am. I'm a psychologist, and I've just had the most the most transformative psychological experience of my life.
Do you remember how much LSD you did that first time?
Just who knows, because it was a
Right.
a tab. Or maybe a tab and a half. I don't remember, but it's not a constant amount, so I don't really know. But it was enough that I saw walls pulsing, and I felt concepts changing, and I had a range of emotions.
It wasn't scary.
No, it was never scary.
And you did it as a group.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you have set and setting, as Timothy Leary, as you learn from Storming Heaven, you learn about the experiences they had and the way. And look, Timothy Leary, who became one of my idols.
Set means your intentions that you want to.
The mental set is like your mindset.
Yep.
And then the setting is the environment you're doing it in. So if you're doing it with your grad school friends, we went to a concert on South Street in Philadelphia. It was Dada was the name of the group that was playing, and then we hung out under the fountain at the Philadelphia Art Museum. It was a really spectacular evening, really one of the best in my life, and it was a born again experience. And so here I here I am. I'm studying sociology, morality, all these things, and I was able to step outside and in a sense see things. Well, it's hard to describe, but you sort of step outside of the matrix, as it were. And so when I came back, I was so interested in what had just happened to me. I read everything I could. And somebody, I don't remember who, recommended that I read this book, Storming Heaven by Jay Stevens. It's a cultural history of LSD.
Right.
That is described.
Told in like a Tom Wolfe type fashion.
Yes, exactly. So
very,
it's exciting.
very exciting sentences. Of the three books that you gave me, this one was the easiest to read, I would say.
It's a really fun read. But a lot of it, there was a period where, Timothy Leary brought it into Harvard, and academics were going to study it, and they did study it. It kind of destroyed them in a sense that it destroyed all academic rigor in Leary's work. But that's coming back now. So, Leary and others went too far. They had wild parties. They didn't really study it carefully. Congress ended up banning these things, making them Schedule I drugs. But now, fortunately, there are people, they've gotten permission from the federal government to do this research. NYU is one center. Johns Hopkins is another. Michael Pollan writes about this really well in his
How to
book,
Change Your Mind.
How to Change Your Mind. And that's actually why I'm talking about this with you today, is that until Pollan's book, I just kept this secret, because you weren't supposed to talk about it, and I thought it would damage my credibility as a social scientist to say that some of my ideas came from psychedelic experiences. But once Pollan's book came out, and now everyone's coming out of the woodwork saying, "Yep, that happened to me. Yep, that happened to me."
Steve Jobs was famously talking about it. Tim Ferriss talking about it. Michael Pollan. A lot of thought leaders talk about their psychedelic experience. And for me, growing up in the '80s in the suburbs of Toronto, like drugs were bad, like the high level of drugs.
Cocaine was bad.
Right, cocaine, heroin, marijuana, LSD, acid, everything was bad. And now we're starting to peel apart the onion a little bit and sort of classify and articulate and talk about them, but not to the level that I think you even know about. So it's a thrill actually to talk to somebody of your kind of stature who's speaking openly and positively. So for me, someone who's not done LSD but very curious about it, how do you think about who should think about trying it and for what purposes and how to. So I'm interested in consciousness expansion. That's why I do this whole podcast.
Okay. Well, I'm certainly not going to give advice and recommend that people do illegal activities. But what I will say is that there is some risk of harm, especially if you have schizophrenia in your family. There is some risk of having a terrible trip, and I have had bad trips, which are terrifying. That was on mushrooms, not on LSD. These drugs are illegal in most places, so there are a lot of risks involved in doing them. But what amazed me, so as I did research on drug use, after that, this was 1993, after reading this book, I would survey people and I would just be aware of what I was reading. And what I found is that hardly anyone is grateful to cocaine. Like no one says, "Oh, thank God I found cocaine. It just made me who I am," or heroin. Now, alcohol is very mixed. A lot of people are grateful to alcohol because they had great times on it. But, there are an awful lot of people who are dead or victims of sexual violence because of alcohol. So alcohol has inflicted an enormous cost, but also enormous benefits on society. LSD is unbelievably positive in that balance. What I mean is, and surveys show this, if you ask people who take part in these experiments, are you glad you did it? Was it important? It's overwhelmingly positive.
Not just positive, but life-changing, transformational.
Right.
It's completely helped me become who I am.
That's right. And that's why we're seeing now a resurgence of the psychedelic industry. Timothy Leary and others in the 60s, they saw the transformative power of these drugs. It's one class of drugs that act on serotonin neurotransmitter systems.
When you say psychedelic, what are you talking about, just quickly?
Primarily, we're talking about LSD, psilocybin mushrooms.
You don't put cannabis in there.
No, cannabis is not. It overlaps a bit in the phenomenology, but it's an entirely different neurotransmitter system. It's its own neurotransmitter system.
So really, you're talking LSD and psilocybin are the two psychedelics,
along with yage or DMT from the Amazon and peyote. Those are the true psychedelics. I forget the name of the drug class.
No, that's okay. Ayahuasca, I hear a lot.
Ayahuasca, yeah. Ayahuasca is what yage and DMT are. That's right.
Okay, and you're saying, in side point, they're illegal. So do you believe they should be?
I do believe that they should be available therapeutically, and I do believe they should be decriminalized. To me, it's an open question. If they were as available as alcohol or cigarettes, what would happen? I suspect that the results would be good, but I'm not confident in that.
Yeah.
And so there are experiments going on with decriminalization of. So we'll see. We'll see in the states that are decriminalizing it. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's interesting also because part of it is for people that are interested in exploring their consciousness and doing so in a way that the studies show people typically like afterwards. Mm-hmm. And you read biographies of people like Steve mm-hmm. Jobs and you hear Tim Ferriss and you hear Jonathan Haidt talking about the positive benefits. Mm-hmm. Then you have a whole other issue when it's not legal. It's like, how do you get some? How do you know the quality? Who do you do it with? Who's trained enough to help me? And who can I find to be a guide? And there's this entire missing industrial complex.
Well, that's right. And that's coming out now. There are all kinds of companies now that are commercializing it. And I think that's a good step. I think that way we'll introduce it in a way that's controlled. And it may be that in 10 or 20 years, we totally decriminalize it, make it as legal as alcohol or as marijuana is becoming.
Yeah. And when you say, I didn't feel anger for 6 months after, I still feel, and you seem, I listened to a lot of interviews before I came to chat with you, and you seem chill the whole time. What could explain that? Something so deep embedded in you as, I don't mean to pick on anger, but it's just something you've mentioned before, but we could pick many other things. Yeah. How does that happen? What is going on that affects you so deeply, permanently?
Well, I think I think my temperament is such that I was always looking on both sides of things, and I think I was always fairly calm as a child. So my temperament perhaps predisposed me to this. And then my field of study, studying moral psychology and political psychology, also predisposed me to this and helped me to get to certain places. And then getting older helps you. As your testosterone level drops as a man, you're less volatile. And many cultures think that wisdom comes with age. But a lot of it really is due to those first psychedelic experiences. I followed them up with a lot of experiences with psilocybin mushrooms.
Right.
My girlfriend in Chicago and I grew mushrooms and experimented with them that summer. And then I went to India for 3 months at the end of that summer. So I do think without the drugs, it's possible that I would be like this, but they really, it was a real phase change.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful to you for speaking openly about it because, quote from the intro of the book says, try describing the taste of ice cream to someone who has never had any and multiply that difficulty by 1,000 and you will get some idea of how hard it was to describe what it felt like to be one with the universe, to know that you existed on a multitude of levels and not just on the puny one called I. It sounds like that's some of what you're talking about.
That's right. That's part of what's so remarkable is you read people's trip journals, you read people's experiences, and then you compare them to mystical experiences, near-death experiences, spontaneous peak experiences, and there's a lot of overlap. There clearly are some neural circuits that are rarely activated, but once activated, they have positive transformative effects, very similar across types of elicitation.
Why is that?
I suspect there's something in, I don't know the neurology of it, but there's something in these in these serotonin circuits. So the mystery is, how do you get psychological change that's quick? So there's a wonderful book I could have recommended here called Quantum Change, because almost all psychological change is slow, but people do have these quantum changes, these changes in a night, as I was describing as what happened to me on June 12th, 1993. How you get a quantum change like that, there's clearly a neurochemical story there, because I couldn't do that just by thinking.
Yeah. And there's a lot about Aldous Huxley in this book.
Yes.
And you've brought a Huxley book here right beside us, The Doors of Perception. Huxley also believed the brain and the central nervous system operated as a vast filter that reduced the flood of sensory data to a manageable trickle. You're talking about increased neurological connection that happens in the mind. I know it's my logical brain kind of clawing at you here. But this is what you're talking about. You've mentioned a lot about 500 million years of brain evolution and a few million years of our prefrontal kind of cortex evolution. Like, what is the mind, and how do we think about our relationship with it?
Yeah. That's what's so much fun about psychology, is I get to study the mind all day long, year after year. There was this period of extraordinary mental exploration in the 60s and 70s as the intellectuals discovered LSD first, and psychotherapists used it in the 50s. A lot of famous Hollywood movie stars, I think Rock Hudson and others, testified about how they had LSD therapy in the 50s. So I don't know how it changes people. I really don't know.
That's just a big missing piece of the research right now.
I'm sure there are. Yeah, there certainly is a huge amount of progress on what happens at the moment. There's a neuroscientist at Penn who found that it's especially loss of activity or change of activity in the parietal lobe, which locates us in space and time. When that is paralyzed, you sort of we all have a sense of where our boundaries are, and when you lose track of yourself in space and time, now you can begin to understand mystical experiences from around the world. They all talk about, or they commonly talk about, your ego boundaries are destroyed. You become one with the universe, and you realize everything is love. Like that sort of stuff that sounds kind of trite because it comes from so many cultures. But somehow these molecules are doing that in the brain. Andrew Newberg is the neuroscientist, brilliant neuroscientist, who has been studying these experiences, these transcendent experiences, for a long time.
Yeah, chapter 40 of this podcast, we had Pete Holmes on, and he brought forth the book by Ram Dass called Be Here Now.
Yes, I read that.
Yeah, which felt like an acid trip in paper form.
Yeah.
And it was what he's talking about, walking into the ocean waves and feeling like you're part of that entire energy of the universe. And I can imagine living in that place would be a benefit. So I'm partly asking as someone's trying to learn about it, but you're making me much more interested in trying to figure out a way to navigate myself into exploring this area.
Well, I think you're Canadian, and I believe a lot of these companies that are doing this, that are exploring ways to have people come in and have these experiences under supervision.
Right.
What I'm afraid of is that 15-year-old kids are going to be taking too much, and terrible things can happen.
Yes.
So that's why, I'm not saying, they should be legalized. Like, I don't know what the answer is.
And you were also really careful to add in that you were almost 30, it sounds like.
I was 29 when this happened.
Right. You're 29. You're so you're a lot of what I read when I was a little kid was the male brain does not fully mature until age 21, 22, 23. So, don't take, if you can, alcohol, cannabis, etc., until your brain is past the point of maturity. So there's something to be said here in terms of labeling this whole conversation with a really, really big warning for all the listeners. But at the same time, thanks for opening the door, because it's nice to be able to openly talk about it.
That's right. We need to talk about it. We need to study it. And I think there are enormous therapeutic effects and benefits that can be reaped. And I think the research is going on right now. So I'm hopeful that in a few years, the landscape will look different.
And would you point people, anyone listening, to those that are looking to learn more or kind of walk down this path, where would you tell them to go look? You mentioned the Michael Pollan book, How to Change Your Mind. That's pretty recent, so that's one resource people can go towards.
That's a good question. I should have a ready answer, and I don't. And this is so, I don't want to send people. I mean, there are certain websites that I found very helpful, but I would just say start with the Michael Pollan book.
Okay.
That gives you a real lay of the land, of the history. And also Storming Heaven. I mean, Storming Heaven is a great cultural history book, and it'll give you a lot of the background here.
Wonderful. John, I really, I'm so grateful to you for opening up these 3 books and talking to us about how, I don't know if you have time for a couple fast money round questions to close us off.
Sure, let's
They're
try.
just about books specifically, because this is a books podcast. Number 1, hardcover, paperback, audio, or E?
For things where I want to take notes, I'm entirely E, because I love being able to just read on any device, upside down at the beach, wherever, on my iPhone, anywhere, and then copy out quotes. So, because I'm an academic, all my reading is now done on E. But I love audiobooks and podcasts because you can do it while you're out walking, and I enjoy hearing an author read his or her own book.
Is there a podcast or two that you listen to that you
Oh my
recommend?
God, there's so many great ones now. I'll just tell you the ones that I really appreciate,
Please,
where I just feel they're blowing my mind. So Scott Galloway, my colleague at NYU,
Yes.
he has Sway and also the Prof G podcast.
Yes, Scott Galloway, yes.
Barry Weiss has been just consistently bringing on amazing guests, and she's a great interviewer, and it's about just really important
Do you know
things.
that, Barry Weiss?
Barry Weiss, Weiss.
Okay.
I think it's called Honestly with Barry Weiss.
Okay.
Richard Reeves, he's a scholar at the Brookings Institute. I think it's called Dialogues. He brings on really interesting guests about policy and religion issues. Andrew Sullivan. My respect for Andrew Sullivan just keeps growing, especially as I learn more about his childhood and what he went through and how he grew and how his mind developed. So I really love Andrew Sullivan. And let's see, gosh, there are several others. There are just so many good ones now. Yasha Monk has one with his project Persuasion, and so especially if you're interested in politics and society. So I think I'm taking a very, very negative view of social media platforms where people make content that is rated. That I think is incredibly toxic. But
people make content that
is rated by others.
Rated, okay,
because
gotcha.
that quantifies things. That has all kinds of pernicious effects.
Yes.
So I'm really down on social media. But it turns out voice is much better. So Clubhouse, I think, is great. People are much more willing to speak on Clubhouse because listeners would have to go through the trouble of transcribing something to get you in trouble. Whereas anything that's written, it's effortless to take it out of context and make it blow up. So people are all on eggshells about what they say in writing. But Clubhouse is great. Podcasts are amazing. This is a real golden age of ideas if you were to just look at Clubhouse and especially podcasts.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. How do you organize your books on your bookshelf?
I organize them by topic. So I keep all my sociology books together, all my philosophy books together. I just organize them by topic. And now that I have about 400 or 500 on Kindle, I have to figure out how to do that.
Exactly. But by topic is very, very Dewey Decimally, which is what I do. What is your book lending policy?
I don't lend books because I know that they won't come back, because I know that times people have lent me a book. I never get to it. Reading a book is a very personal thing, and it might take years before you have time for it. So I don't lend books. What I do, in fact, the reason I don't have Storming Heaven is that I buy multiple copies and I give it out to people that I think want to read it. So my policy, I don't lend books. I buy extras of the ones that I love and I give them away. Nice.
Very generous. Do you have a favorite bookstore, living or dead, by chance?
Oh, well, sure. Well, here we are in Greenwich Village, so the Strand Bookstore.
Yes.
Right by Union Square.
Yeah, you can't beat the Strand.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place to browse.
Do you have a white whale book or a book you've been trying to read the longest, or trying to?
Oh, I mean, I used to make lists, of literature like I've never read, Moby Dick or the great Russian novels. And my wife gives me reports on them. She used COVID in part to read Russian literature, and I'd love to read those, and they're very psychological and they're brilliant and deep. But I'm just, I think we're all drowning. There's a wonderful book I'm reading now by Martin Gurry called The Revolt of the Public, and it's about how information is doubling or more every year since 2000. We're all trying to fend off information. Information is coming at us, and the struggle is to not drown in information. So it's very hard to find time to read whole books. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And then to close off this entire conversation with the very last question, I see you more than a writer, a professor, a speaker. You are, and you've been rated as one of the best in the world. You are a thinker. And when I talk to you more than anything else, I feel like my body is responding to the depth and the width of your ideas and the way you're thinking. Can you leave us, and you can take time to think about it, with a piece or two of hard-fought wisdom on everybody listening out there? How can we learn to grow our skills in thinking. You are a big, broad, deep thinker. What are you doing, or what would you recommend people to do who are trying to live and navigate in this constant information world? How do we learn to become better thinkers?
Yeah. So I've begun starting off most of my talks, especially my talks to young people, with the question, what is the fundamental question in life? What's the fundamental question? And people say, is there a God? And I say, no. The fundamental question is approach or avoid. Fundamental means basic, low level. And our brains are set up, if you go back to the very first brains, they're set up to answer one question, which is approach or avoid. Do I move towards it or away from it? And the next 500 million years of brain evolution is just commentary on that question. Our brains get better and better at answering approach versus avoid. And so human brains have two specialized hemispheres. The front left hemisphere is specialized for approach motivations, and the front right is specialized for withdrawal or avoidance motivations. And so the advice is, and I do this especially when I speak to young people now, it's, do you want to live your life in explore mode or defend mode? And if you plug into social media and you listen to the things that people, your peers, are saying about everything's dangerous, everything's a threat, you're going to live your life in explore mode. You're not going to grow. You're not going to learn, and you're going to end up.
Sorry, defend mode.
Yeah, defend mode. I'm sorry, defend mode. If you live your life in defend mode, you're not going to learn or grow. So the secret to success in this amazing world that we live in, which has many problems, is to spend almost all of your life in explore mode, except for the very rare times when you are literally, truly under physical threat. And so that's the challenge. As a young person especially, whoever learns the most before he dies wins. And so spend all your life, or almost all your life, in explore mode. Don't get sucked into anger and us versus them stuff. If you want to make the world better, I'll just add on one other thing. It just occurred to me yesterday.
Please.
I'll just try this advice out here for the first time, which is almost never get angry. Because if you're subject to anger, then you're hackable. And we now live in a world in which so many people and causes and sites are trying to make you angry. And once you get angry, you can't think for yourself. You're going to be in defend mode. You can't really learn. You can't find the truth. So if you think you want to make the world a better place, you can't do it by getting angry. If you're angry, you're almost certain to believe false things. You can't really think for yourself. So that would be my final advice. Try to free yourself from anger. And this basically is what you get from the Bhagavad Gita, from Buddha, from many of the world's great religions. Think for yourself, learn for yourself, try to spend your life in explore mode, not defend mode.
Jonathan Haidt, thank you for letting us explore with you and approach with you. I really, really am grateful to you coming on 3 Books. Thank you so much for this.
Oh, well, thank you, Neil. It's been a pleasure to go back to 1993 and this transformative period, which I haven't thought about in a while. So thank you.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. It is just me. Just Neil again. Wow. Oh my gosh. I have that mind stretched like taffy feeling. I feel like my mind has been beaten up by rolling pins, pulled in all directions, and just worked into like some frothy wet lather. I mean, this guy's ability, Jonathan's ability to stretch our thinking is almost unparalleled. I mean, it's almost unparalleled. When Roger Martin introduced us, he said to me on the side, Neil, good luck with John. You'll have a wonderful time. He's a very, very kind and generous man, as you noticed and saw with the amount of patience he has, despite the fact that his mind's going a million miles a minute. But that's what Roger said. Roger's like, but you'll have to keep up with him. He thinks pretty quickly. Yeah. No shit. I mean, it's kind of hard to keep up with them. I did my best. I hope it was a functional conversation. But I have to tell you, through the whole thing, I was like, there's so many quotes, so many thoughts, so many jumping off points. How about this? We are now in the world after Babel, which is a frightening, lonely place where we are not bound into healthy or stable groups. It's so true, but he's articulating it through a story, as he does. Why a story? Well, we heard the quotes on stories. And by the way, just if you haven't read it, visit my monthly book club. I send out that book club every single month. I have a link to Jonathan's article, but you can just type in after Babel. He actually has an out of office on his email right now saying, I'm getting inundated with feedback for my article, so I can't respond to email right now. This article is going massively viral as an 8,000 word article decrying kind of how social media made us stupid kind of would right now. But with the research, the intensity, the background, it's just wonderful. And of course, it is the seed kernel of his next big cob of a book, which will, I think, be called After Babel and be coming out in 2023. So stay tuned to that for that. That's only the first quote. How about this one? Each side is right in what they affirm, but wrong in what they deny. How chewy is that one to think about? How often can you think about that and apply that to things in our day jobs, in our lives, in our corporate setting? Each side is right in what they affirm, but wrong in what they deny. Or this one, third quote, pleasure comes not from reaching your goal, it comes from making progress on the journey. Yes. There's a lot of stuff out there right now about this. One thing I've been saying in my speeches is the goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to be better than before. And this viral quote that James Clear of Atomic Habits has been saying is, the goal is to get better 1% every day. Brené Brown, you remember chapter 70, it's the North Star, all the work she's doing. We're never going to get there, but it tells us which way to go. Pleasure comes not from reaching your goal. It comes from making progress on the journey. Now, that's 3 quotes, so we kind of should stop there. I only do 3 quotes, but it's too tempting to keep going. Here's a few more. The secret to success in this amazing world that we live in, which has many problems, is to spend almost all your life in explore mode. We're doing that together on this show. I'm not sure if we're all having success. I think we are. But the secret is to spend almost of your life in explore mode. This reminds me of the famous speech by Cleese, Monty Python dude, where he talks about your brain being in open mode or closed mode, then tells us how both modes are important. Famous John Cleese speech on open mode and closed mode. You can look that up. Fourth, when you lose track of yourself in space and time, this is how you can begin to understand mystical experiences from around the world. Your ego boundaries are destroyed and you become one with the universe. Not too many years ago, I would have sort of been like, wow, what a spiritual kind of woo-woo type quote. But just a second here. This is Jonathan Haidt, famed, piles of degrees, professor at business school, and he's talking to us about tripping on LSD, right? He's talking to us about losing track of yourself in space and time. Why? You begin to understand mystical experiences from around the world. You notice your ego boundaries are destroyed. You become one with the universe. That's a helpful thing, right? It lets you tap into the elephant. What do I mean? Another quote. The mind is divided like a small rider on a large elephant. The small rider is our conscious reasoning. The large elephant is everything else, all the intuition. If you have read The Righteous Mind, you know that he focuses on this metaphor deeply. He introduces, I think, in the happiness hypothesis, and he continues it in all of his work. So The Elephant and the Rider is one of his most famous stories. There's been a ton of YouTube videos created. We'll try to link to one in the show notes where people have done animations about this concept. It's really, really, I think, liberating, frankly. And it does relate to the last quote, which is, if you are subject to anger, you are hackable. Do you notice the dude never rises at all? Right? I was giving him challenging quotes, not to challenge him, but to say, people say this about your work, people say that, or whatever. He just pretty much doesn't get angry. He hasn't since 1993. If you're subject to anger, you're hackable. Once you get angry, you can't really learn. You can't find the truth. I have to confess the conversation has made me extremely intrigued about exploring the psychedelic universe much more than I have. I mean, how can you not be when you hear Jonathan talk about it in such an enlightened way? This isn't like standing at some dude at the corner saying, hey, you gotta want to buy this stuff. I mean, this is a really fascinating perspective. I'm so grateful to Jonathan for having both the courage but the openness to have this type of conversation with us. I spoke to another friend of mine who's interviewed Jonathan on his podcast. I said, yeah, one of his books is about LSD. He wrote back to me on text, what? I was like, yeah, one of his books is all about LSD. We're going to talk about it. He's like, what? Like, he's never talked about that before. This is a guy with a seriously beautiful mind, helping steer us so importantly in this destabilizing reality that we live in. I hope you found this conversation as inspiring as I did. It's a beautiful one, I think, to pair with, how about Douglas Rushkoff, right? He's kind of like, or Seth Godin, right? Or, I just like head back to chapter 3 or to chapter 83 with Rushkoff. I mean, there's a lot of conversations that we're having together about how we orient ourselves in the machine. Why are we having those conversations? Because I need orientation in the machine. I need to figure out how to orient myself in this machine, and I'm going to help you, and you're going to help me figure it out. Okay, so with that, let's head over to the top 1,000. That is the list of every single formative book that we ever have on the show. If you click the top 1,000 at the top of 3books.ca, that's 3books.ca, you will scroll all the way down to the bottom. You'll notice, there's Susan Cain's books, right? Chapter 102. She gave us 698, Claudine at School, 697, Do What You Are, 696, The Essential Roomie. You remember that from the conversation with Susan Cain. By the way, side note, Jonathan Haidt and Susan Cain, you may not be surprised to know, are friends. And I told him, I'm sorry, I had to push your conversation back. Mistimed it with the Atlantic article because Susan Cain's book just came out. He said, I would always be happy to go after Susan Cain. Thank you so much, Neil. He's a very, very kind person. But now we're on chapter 103. Now we're on chapter 103. We've got 3 more books to add to the top 1,000. How about number 695, On Suicide by Emil Durkheim, Durkheim. I personally found this book massively dense. It's very, very, very dense. So if you found the conversation so interesting and appealing that you want to dive in, please do. But just a warning, this is a big, thick, meaty, gigantic book. Not to dissuade you. Number 694, Patterns, Thinking, and Cognition by Howard Margolis, University of Chicago Press. A fascinating book, similarly academically rich. Very small font, very lots of studies. Like, this is an academic book. Okay? Just wanted to give you guys the heads up. Number 693, Storming Heaven by Jay Stevens. This one, about LSD and exploring the pivotal role LSD played in the 60s and 70s, was written in a much more accessible way for my silly little mind. And it really gives a nice formative overview of the relationship of LSD to our culture. Okay? So those are the 3 wonderful books added to our top 1,000, courtesy of Mr. Jonathan Haidt. Hey, are you still here? Did you make it past the 3-second pause? If so, hello, 3 bookers. Hello, Cover to Cover Club members. Hello, paper cutters. I want to welcome you back. I want to welcome you back to the after party, to the end of the podcast club. One of 3 clubs we have for 3 books listeners, including, by the way, the Cover to Cover Club, people listening to every single chapter of the show. The Secret Club, can't tell you more about it, but you got to call our phone number for clues. I love it when you call me. I love hearing your voice. Let's jump over to the phones now. By the way, the number is 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Drop me a line. Let me know one of your formative books, anything you want to say, feedback, love, whatever, criticism, whatever. Let's jump over to the phones now.
Hi, Neil. This is Kristen from Calgary, Alberta. I was just listening to episode 102 with Susan Cain, and I just wanted to call in and just express how much that speaks to the feeling of bittersweet speaks to my core of my being. I've always referred to it as poignancy or poignant, P-O-I-G-N-A-N-T. Merriam-Webster says that that's painfully affecting the feelings or deeply affecting touching, and designed to make an impression, also pleasurably stimulating. And I always think that speaks to me. I think the song that I feel represents that the most is Nights in White Satin by the Moody Blues. It definitely has that feeling of the sublime, but also, I don't know, that inexpressible longing and melancholy that you might have for something that you've never known or never will. So thank you for doing all that you do, and I look forward to hearing what you come up with in the future. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you so much to Kristen from Calgary for calling in, telling us how much Susan Cain meant to you. And I just couldn't help but respond to your voicemail with Nights in White Satin in the background. And I'm stopping it at 30 seconds, Kristen. Why? Because I think you get sued if you play music longer than 30 seconds, or at least that's what I've been told by my wonderful producer, Dave. Right, Dave? Okay? We try to hide music in here and there, but you can't go longer than 30 seconds. The Moody Blues, Nights in White Satin, 72,743,984 views. Okay, I can hear what you mean. I absolutely hear what you mean. One of the very first official music videos, apparently, of all time, recorded in 1967 in Paris, France. Number one comment comes from Judy, my husband's favorite song. I lost him in 2017. We were married for 26 years. God, I miss him. Number two most popular comment from Cindy, I was in my 20s when the Moody Blues mesmerized me with this music. I am 72 now, and I still love it. Okay. The Moody Blues, Nights in White Satin, a song I'm not familiar with, but which Kristen adds as an addendum to the bittersweet conversation we have with Susan Cain. I'm going to forward this music video to Susan Cain as well as your voicemail so she can hear it as well. Thank you so much, Kristen, for your call. Okay, and now it is time for the letter of the chapter. And this chapter's letter comes from Akut Karalioglu. I'm sharing his name with permission. The first name is Aykut. Last name is Karalioglu. From Turkey, currently living in the San Francisco Bay Area. He writes to me, first of all, that he loved the chapter with Dave, the CEO. His way of running Walmart is definitely eye-opening. And thank you for hosting Derek Sivers. You are an inspiration to me. I've been writing you for 2 years with nonstop. Thank you. The 3 Books podcast is definitely reshaped me in a good way. I started to read the 3-book guest top 3 formative books. And when you started to read, you write more than I saw. You wrote 1,000 Straight Days. Then I found out Seth Godin is doing the same thing for the last 15 plus years on his book. Then I said, why not me? Smiley face. I didn't read all books, but I can easily say I bought 100 of it because almost every guest I listened to took me another perspective of life and gave me understanding of we are not alone in this life for making the world a better place. Akut, thank you. Thank you for your love, for your energy, for your message. Thank you for sharing the spirit of the show through through this dialogue, through this letter. I really, really appreciate your love. Please drop me a line, as I always say to every letter or voicemail, and I kind of forget to do this sometimes, but if you listen to me, keep sending it. I'll send you a signed book, any book you want, anywhere you want. Thank you so much for your letter. By the way, if you're thinking about leaving a letter, please do. Any way, shape, or form is fine. I see them on the review pages, okay? So I know I'm trying not to look at the review pages, but if you leave a review on iTunes, it's always so kind. It really does help us, actually. The discoverability of podcasts has really, really gone down. If you do not invest a ton of money in podcast promotion, you're quickly falling to the bottom. I know this because if you get less letters, then you get less notice. So it's just like, we want to spread the show, let's spread the show, right? If we want to tell people about the special conversation we're having, let's tell them about the special conversation. We want to keep it just for ourselves, fine. But I say let's spread it out. Let's spread it out a little bit. Akut, thank you for spreading it out. Okay. And now it is time for the word of the chapter. Hold on to your hats, everybody. Here we go. Back to Mr. Jonathan Haidt.
I used to be a standard rationalist. I became an intuitionist and an emergentist synchronously in time, reading ethnography. Emergent facts, a universal dictum: when war comes, suicide plummets. We have what Durkheim called anomie. This was one of those delicious paradoxes that everything is coming apart, shredded. They encourage social posturing where everybody else is chiming in, increasingly pulled into this binary divide. Let us go down and confound their language. We saw this bizarre eruption of safetyism. I'm concerned about illiberalism. That is just enervating. It's not just that it's logical, it's that it's post hoc, which fits with the connectionist approach of all you do is speak to the elephant, then you're a demagogue. Very similar across types of elicitation. Loss of activity or change of activity in the parietal lobe sounds kind of trite. That has all kinds of pernicious effects.
Holy cow, that was the word cloud of word cloud. How many ISTs? How many IST? Rationalist, intuitionist, emergentist. I mean, there's so many words that safetyist, deliberate. I mean, there's we got a lot to choose from here. I kind of wanted to go. I was thinking dictum, demagogue, so many things. But eventually, I want to use a word he mentioned more than once, maybe more than twice, anomie. Anomie, Anomie.
Anomie.
Anomie. Oh, sorry, I'm saying it wrong. Sorry, say that again. Well, actually, I'll go over to Miriam. Miriam, can you say this one more time for me?
Anomie.
Enemy. Enemy. I kind of prefer the way Google said it, actually.
Anomie.
Enemy. A-N-O-M-I-E. Lack of the usual social or ethical standards in an individual or group. Not good enough, Google. Let's go over to Miriam. Miriam says, social instability resulting from a breakdown of standards and values. Whoa. Social instability. It sounds like such a positive word. It sounds like bon ami or like good friend. No. Social instability resulting from a breakdown of standards and values. Okay. The reforms of a ruined economy under these conditions brought about social anomie, desperation and poverty rather than relief and prosperity. Okay, how about another sentence that we can kind of understand a bit better? How about this one? The theory that high-rise architecture leads to anomie in the residents. Yeah, they don't have standards anymore, that they're living in boxes, apparently. Nobody ever used this word until the 1950s when its use skyrocketed. It came from the 1930s from French, okay, originally from the Greek anomia, which means lawlessness. Let's go over to Edom Online just to double-check that. It means the absence of accepted social values. It was originally not the 1930s, says Edom Online. They go deeper, don't they? It's actually 1915, in reference to, wait for it, Durkheim. Durkheim, who gave the word its modern meaning of social theory in French, a reborrowing with the French spelling of anomie, A-N-O-M-Y. Lawlessness, violation of the divine law. Oh my gosh, Jonathan Haidt. Thank you so much for helping save the world from anomie by giving us so many things we can latch our minds, our thoughts, our ideas onto. You are restabilizing the destabilizing ground that we are on right now. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much to all of you for listening. And until next time, remember that you are what you eat and you are what you read. Keep turning that page, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.